Is my microphone improved now, or do I need to shout?
I think if you can speak up, Mike, that would help.
Yeah, sure thing. Good afternoon, people. I'm Mike Perks. I'm a tree ecophysiologist. That means I've spent a lot of time understanding how trees interact with the environment. And I'm going to talk to you today about right tree, right place, right reason, delivering woodland carbon benefits. So UK historically, Scotland specifically, has had periods with quite good woodland cover. But over the last century, it's been really very, very poor. So here we've got 1895 to 1995, 100 years, and woodland cover is improved over that period, but at the very best, where we've got large scale commercial conifer plantings, we're at 35%. Compared to our sort of equivalent latitudinal cousins in the Fenno-Scandinavian regions, we're at about half what they're at. So we should have plenty of space for more woodlands. So how do we know that trees are good for carbon? Well, Pete touched on this a little bit. I'm just going to give you another sort of perspective on that. Pete was talking to you here about photosynthesis being the carbon in and respiration losses being the carbon, immediate carbon or semi-immediate carbon loss out. And what we're interested in is what's the net benefit here in a sort of line above the forest, above the ecosystem of interest, which in this case is a woodland. So we can measure that. And what we end up coming up with is a value called net ecosystem exchange or net ecosystem productivity. And I do this as part of my day job. Well, and my pal Georgios. And our main field site is in a commercial Sitka plantation. This picture on the right of the slide. And on the top of this 32-meter tall tower, we have a suite of instrumentation which samples at 20 times a second the carbon and water vapor exchange, plus a whole load of other environmental variables. And we can add that up over time, and it tells us whether the footprint that you're measuring, whether that is in fact taking up carbon, becoming a sequestering, becoming a carbon lockdown, or whether it's emitting. So this idea of net ecosystem exchange. So up on the top of the tower, here's a couple of views. The slide on the left, this thing that looks a bit, I don't know, like a triffid. That's an eddy covariance system. That's what's measuring the CO2 exchange at 20 times a second is in this tube here. And this system here is a sonic anemometer. So that's measuring the movement of air in 3 dimensions. So you decide whether the air is going in or out, how much carbon's in it, and you add that up. And over time, with a lot of clever maths and physics that have been done by people far brighter than me, you end up with the carbon values. You also get some nice views up here. It's not very good for people who don't like heights. So I'm just going to give you an animation if it works. If not, we'll move on. Are you seeing my screen here? It says net flux. Yes, perfect. So I'll talk you through as it goes. Basically, the gross input into the system, GPP, gross photosynthetic production, that's the in. The soil respiration and the R-eco are the out. So that's coming out from the leaves, from the soils, from the wood. This is the fast turnover and release of CO2. And the net flux is the benefit. And the nomenclature on this slide is a flux coming out of the atmosphere is a negative value. So the top values, watch the net flux, and I'll talk you through as we go. There's 2 run-throughs. So we've got net flux, the yellow dot, R-Eco, the green dot, respiration, and GPP. This is measured in a flux site in an oak forest. So as the season starts, no leaves, not much happening. Then the leaves happen and we start getting GPP is peaking around the middle of the year. And so our net flux is at its most negative. And then as the leaves disappear, the whole system comes into abatement again. We've still got some respiration. There's still carbon being lost from the wood. There's still carbon being lost from the soil because soil organisms are respiring. So watch that again and keep your eye this time on the net flux. So close to zero, little losses over the winter. And then as we get into the spring, big size of your net flux, largely negative, and that's continuing through to September, October, leaf loss back to zero. And I think now it's just going to draw you the lines. There we go, nice. So you can see here from the net flux line, the mustard yellow line, just losing a little bit in an oak forest over the spring, big levels of sequestration over the summer, and then back to zero. So if we do this and compare the two forest types that I've described, where we have these systems in place, for a young Sitka spruce forest, you're in the notation is the other way around here. My colleague didn't understand how to present the data correctly. So positive is carbon uptake. And you can see that the spruce forest is taking up carbon almost all year. If it's above about 5 degrees, it's photosynthesizing. Whereas you've got a very big peaks and troughs in the oak forest. And when you add them all up, you get about 24 tons of CO2 taken in by the spruce forest, and you get about 15 tons taken in by the broadleaf, the oak dominated forest. And effectively that's because the rate at which they put on biomass is different. So where should we plant our expanding forest in order to help meet our net zero targets and deliver benefits beyond 2045, 2050? What species should we use and what management regimes should we opt for? Well, it's not an easy answer. But first of all, there are some tools to help you. So this is actually, I took a quick trip to your Sea Change site and met a couple of, I think, somewhat reputable local residents. We went and looked at the site, and thankfully the farmer had already ploughed it for me. So digging a hole was really easy, because the key to your choice is the soils that you're planting upon. And so here we have Pete and Joe, and here we have a faced soil profile, which shows to me that this is a glade mineral soil, so very good quality. I take that piece of information away, and in a bespoke tool that's publicly available from Forest Research called ESC, ESC, which stands for Ecological Site Classification. And it's an online resource. Anyone can have a play. You go in and you choose your location. So this is the location of the Sea Change site. And it will give you some default values, but you'll get better data return, better output if you put in known information about your soils, rather than the relatively broad scale mapped layer underneath. So we're putting site-specific data in. And then the outputs, you can choose a variety of outputs, both numerical, but also this sort of visual image. And for this example, I've restricted the choice to native species. But it's quite easy to run it again and have all of the productive conifers if that's something that you're interested in. When we run the site for species suitability, the really good news is it's all greens in this suitability column, the first set of dots. So you've got a broad brush of species that are site appropriate. The other thing that's really of interest then is the yield, because the higher the yield value, the more carbon your forest will be sequestering per year. And so your higher yielding species here are pine, the native conifer, aspen, alder, cherry. But as you can see, you've got a lot of choices here. So it's a good site, good soils, plenty of scope. Excellent. Oh, where's my mouse gone? Excuse me. We can also use this ecological site classification tool to do a much more sort of scenario level planning, landscape scale, using the default data layers. And here we've got an example where we've taken a small-ish area. This would be an area managed by a forestry professional, probably. And we can return the same sort of outputs, different species, different suitabilities. And here it comes back that map that Pete showed in his talk. This one is a slightly different scenario. This is a native conifer scenario. So basically it's a Scots pine map. And what we've done is we've combined the ecological site classification, the suitability layers for different species. We've done above ground carbon numbers, and we've done soil gains and losses using the soil modeling expertise in Pete and Joe and their group, so that you're getting the whole ecosystem benefit as a mapped layer. And it throws up a few interesting points when you run this sort of analysis. The first key point is that your decision might vary depending upon when you want to deliver the benefits. So if your goal is to maximize the benefits in the short term, delivery to 2050, then the higher yielding non-native species actually do the best job. Even over the longer term, that can be the case. But after a normal sort of rotation length, which is, let's say for a broadleaf is 60, 80 years, that these species will naturally be around for the birches and the alders and the aspens. Oaks, obviously a lot longer, beech longer lived. The point is that they're still providing you with benefit, maybe not at quite the same level. But again, there's this balance that Pete pointed out about the other benefits that you're getting, biodiversity benefits, local bird life, visual amenity. So there's not wrong choices, there's just a number of choices. But the point I really want to bring forward here is that the climate emergency does then challenge you to think about whether even a small proportion of your scheme might look to something that's a non-native species, not exclusively planting a commercial system, but going, and Douglas fir is a beautiful tree. So you could have that and use it as a windbreak or whatever. You know, there's those sort of other options that you just need to think through your process. And this is Sir Harry Studholme, who was the commissioner for the Forestry Commission until recently. And he puts it very succinctly in an article in a national newspaper. which says that the dense timber of native oak has more carbon per cubic metre. But there are many more cubic meters of timber in a Douglas fir plantation. I'll leave it there. Thanks very much for listening.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Mike. That's fantastic. That's some fascinating stuff. That's it's a great intro, but that just fires loads of questions in my head. But we'll come to that another day. I hope we can. So, can we move on? Piers, you want to share your piece for us, please? Just a quick reminder to everyone: fire questions as we're going into the chat box, if you like. I think that's starting to happen, and